Hello and welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Ladi Akiridulwale. The headlines. Referencing Russia's invasion of Ukraine, United States House Speaker Nancy Pelosi says her country's commitment to Taiwan's defense is ironclad. Ukrainian grain carrier Azoni awaits security inspection off Istanbul's coast. And Russia warns the West not to test its resolve during a conference for the Treaty of Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons. We start off in Taiwan, where defying warnings against the visit, the Speaker of the United States House of Representatives, Nancy Pelosi, overnight arrived in Taipei, the Taiwanese capital, where she told her hosts, led by President Tsai Ing-wen, that the commitment of the United States to Taiwan is crucial, especially at this time. Mrs. Pelosi, a longtime critic of China, said it was important to highlight the success Taiwan has made in deepening her democracy, as well as the heights attained in technology. She said this was the message she was bringing on the visit.
Under such, we want Taiwan to always have freedom with security, and we're not backing away from that. It's really clear that while China has stood in the way of Taiwan participating and going to certain meetings, that they understand that they will not stand in the way of people coming to Taiwan. It's a show of friendship, of support, but also a source of learning about how we can work together better in collaboration. To put it in perspective, over 4 decades ago, the Taiwan Relations Act was built in building a strong bond between our two countries, advancing our shared interests of governance, economy, and security, while respecting the One China policy. Our solidarity with you is more important than ever as you defend Taiwan and your freedom. In our bilateral meeting, we discussed key opportunities to deepen our partnership, upholding democracy and human rights and respect for the individual, combating, well, I'll get around to karma. What Taiwan has been so good about is being technologically advanced, whether it's in business or security. And we have to show the world, and that's one of the purposes of our trip, to show the world the success of the people of Taiwan, their courage to change their own country to become more democratic. So we are supporters of the status quo and the rest. We don't want anything to happen to Taiwan by force. So strength, and one of the biggest sources of strength is democracy.
In responding to Mrs. Pelosi's visit, the president of Taiwan, Tsai Ing-wen, thanked the United States for its steadfast support and criticized China for its warnings against the visit. She said her country was working with all stakeholders to ensure the continuation of peace.
And we're grateful for the delegation's visit under such challenging circumstances as a demonstration of unwavering support to the people of Taiwan. The Speaker's presence here in Taiwan served to boost public confidence in the strength of our democracy as a foundation to our partnership with the United States. I told Speaker Pelosi that we are committed to maintaining the status quo across the strait. Military exercises are unnecessary responses. Taiwan has always been open to constructive dialogue, and we will work with stakeholders to bring about stability and peace in the region.
One of the highlights of the visit was the conferment of one of Taiwan's highest civilian honors, the Order of Propitious Clouds, with Special Grand Cordon Medal of Honor on Mrs. Pelosi. At that ceremony, she again reiterated that the U.S. commitment to Taiwan was ironclad.
Thank you. Also, Taiwan has been an island of resilience in the world. Indeed, the people of Taiwan have proven to the world that with hope, courage, and determination, it is possible to build a peaceful and prosperous future, even in terms of the challenges you face. And now, more than ever, America's solidarity with Taiwan is crucial, and that is the message we are bringing here today.
Mrs. Pelosi is expected to fly out of Taiwan later on today. In the meantime, China's military, the People's Liberation Army, announced it was conducting military exercises from Thursday to Sunday in response to Mrs. Pelosi's visit, including joint air and sea drills and live fire exercises. Taiwan's president had criticized this activity while she was receiving Mrs. Pelosi earlier on. Over in Istanbul, the first grain-carrying ship to leave Ukrainian ports in wartime is awaiting security inspection today, a day after entering Turkish waters. The Razoni, carrying 26,527 tons of corn to Lebanon, arrived the Bosphorus entrance from the Black Sea at around 1800 GMT, some 36 hours after it left Ukraine's Odessa port. A senior official in Ankara says it expects roughly one grain ship to depart from Ukraine every day as long as the export agreement holds. According to Turkey's defense ministry, a delegation from the Joint Coordination Center in Istanbul, where Russian, Ukrainian, Turkish, and UN personnel work, is expected to inspect the ship. In another development, a representative of the Russian delegation has warned Western countries not to test Russia's resolve during the UN's review conference of the parties to the Treaty of the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons. Mr. Alexander Trofimov rejected allegations that Russia had threatened to use nuclear weapons in Ukraine. Mr. Trofimov, whose entire speech was posted to the permanent mission of the Russian Federation to the United Nations website, said this was not meant as a threat, but as a statement of what is possible.
That is the thrust of Russia's warnings about the potential consequences of direct aggression by NATO countries against our country in the context of the current crisis that has, in fact, moved on from a fierce hybrid confrontation and dangerous balance on the edge of open military.
The Deputy Director of the Department for Non-Proliferation and Arms Control of the Russian Foreign Ministry, Igor Vishnevetsky, has addressed the General Assembly of the Conference of the Parties of the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, defending the military operation Russia began against Ukraine in February of this year. According to him, Russia's actions were, quote, a necessary response for atrocities taking place in Ukraine, while adding that that country is convinced that a nuclear war must never be fought. The Russian representative also insisted on the need for Iran to resume the implementation of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action and follow its international nuclear obligations.
A world without nuclear weapons is possible. We are facing a totally unprovoked and unjustified military aggression against Ukraine carried out by Russia, a permanent member of the UN Security Council, a nuclear weapon state party to the treaty. Russia is destroying the rules-based international order based on multilateralism. Russia has violated each and every human rights commitment. Its aggression against Ukraine is a clear example of an attempt to subjugate and destroy another state, characteristic to colonial thinking and its modus operandi.
We remain deeply concerned by the severe difficulties that the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action on the Iranian nuclear programs is still experiencing. We urge Iran to return to fully implement its obligations under the JCPOA without delay. Likewise, we urge the DPRK to refrain from further provocations and to take concrete steps toward a complete, verifiable and irreversible denuclearization and to return to the Non-Proliferation Treaty.
Mr. Mathai.
The chief of the UN nuclear watchdog, Rafael Grossi, says the situation in the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant in Ukraine is a volatile one. He explained that the agency has not been able to access the plant as it requires the understanding and cooperation of a number of actors. Mr. Grossi, the Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, said it's a Ukrainian facility, so it requires Ukraine to agree with it, to be comfortable with it.
Is the nuclear, what we have in Zaporizhzhia, what we have in Ukraine, the situation is really, really a volatile one. I think I described it as such in my opening statement, in my remarks. Going there is a very complex thing because it requires the understanding and the cooperation of a number of actors. Of course, it's Ukraine. It's a Ukrainian facility, so it requires Ukraine to agree with it, to be comfortable with it, and to help me carry out the mission. At the same time, the plant is occupied by Russia. We are in a war zone, so the military operations, the military trends are influencing this heavily. If you look at the map where Zaporizhzhia, the nuclear power plant, the location as well, sit, you will see that this, if not at the heart, in a place where it's under active military operations. Iran of 2022 is the nuclear program is very different from the one in 2015. And I think everybody recognizes that, starting with the Iranians, who are saying that they are making strides and amazing advances, and the program is moving ahead very, very fast, and not only ahead but sideways as well, because it's growing in ambition and in capacity. That doesn't mean we cannot verify it, but quite clearly we need the degree of access commensurate with the characteristics of that program. All activities in Iran are under strict IAEA verification. Then they can say they want or they don't want, and it's on the table or under the table, I don't know. But it doesn't add anything to the, to the value of. There are, as I told you, regular exhortations for Israel to do that. Israel, to the best of my knowledge, has not decided to join the NPT yet. So, as I said, I don't comment on intentions of countries. So what I said about Iran, I say about Israel, it's the same. So we cannot tell countries what to do or judge on their intentions. This is the reality. There is a process, and for us, every country should be a member of the NPT. This is and it's my personally held conviction. Everybody should join the NPT, no doubt about it.
Let's talk now to Julian Verlinger, a researcher at the Department of Political and Social Science at the European University Institute. He joins us virtually from Vienna in Austria. Good morning to you, Julian. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, sir. Thank you for having me.
Let me start with what is making the international headlines at the moment, and that is Nancy Pelosi's visit to the island of Taiwan and all the storm it's generating. But Mrs. Pelosi says that against the background of what is going on in Ukraine, where bigger countries, tend to be bullying and intimidating smaller countries, it was important to show solidarity with Taiwan. Do you think she's done that by this visit, and that other smaller countries would probably take some kind of solace from the visit to that island?
Well, Nancy Pelosi's move was certainly a courageous one, and certainly also one which wasn't received, let's say, lightly in China, and wasn't received lightly in the US either. Lots of commentators say this is a very dangerous move at this point. However, I must say I understand her reasoning in this specific question, as we are facing currently a war of aggression inside Europe, which obviously motivates other countries who have certain ideas about perhaps attacking countries in their vicinity for this or another historical reason. makes them perhaps think that it is possible to do so. So visiting Taiwan at this point, I suppose, must be understood as a political move to show that even if the international order appears to have broken down at this moment in Ukraine, it has not broken down in other places.
To what you're deeply involved in at the moment, and that's the situation of the displaced people, the humanitarian crisis that what has gone on in Ukraine has spawned. What is the situation right now with those who are displaced? And there are two groups. There are those who are internally displaced and those who are displaced outside. Let's start off with those who are internally displaced. What can you tell us about their situation at the moment?
Well, so the UNHCR estimates that currently there's about 7 million internally displaced Ukrainians and some more 13 million that are stranded in their homes or in their villages, in their towns due to fighting, destruction of infrastructure, and so on and so forth. Now, we have to compare this with the number of refugees. As you correctly said, the number of refugees currently in Europe is 4 million. So the problem of internally displaced people is numerically speaking much higher than the problem of refugees. Now, the good news is that the international community appears to have stepped up to help IDPs, internally displaced people, via two pathways. First, via direct aid of first-order priorities, such as foodstuff, medical aid, water purification tablets, and these kind of things. And then, of course, also via helping the Ukrainian social welfare services in dealing with this new strain on let's say national social safety nets. Yes, there are places where aid has a hard time reaching, specifically in the east of the country, and in, of course, the occupied territories. But it would be wrong to assume that the situation here is not getting better. Now, the bad news, on the other hand, is that, of course, this for internally displaced people is that this war is far from over. So this means that basically the short-term direct first-order needs will soon be exacerbated by the long-term needs, long-term issues arising from internal displacement, such as access to education, access to specialized healthcare. The IOM currently estimates that 38% of internally displaced people do not have access to full education, that about 1/4 of all Ukrainian internally displaced have no access to specialized healthcare. So these kind of long-term issues will become very important. So it is absolutely paramount for the international community, together with Ukraine, to work on long-term solutions for these issues.
The destination, shall we say, of choice for most of those who leave Ukraine, who have fled Ukraine, would be Poland. And I also happen to know that you also work with a number of agencies which are on the border with Poland to help them move these refugees along and find them some level of comfort even while the war goes on. Does that put a great deal of pressure on the Polish medical facilities and personnel and even their humanitarian organizations in view of what is happening in Ukraine? And if so, is anybody stepping up to help?
Well, definitely. So what we need to know about the Polish healthcare system is that even prior to the crisis, Polish healthcare spending was well below European average. So the OECD, for example, puts a number to this, right? In 2021, the average of European nation spending on healthcare was 3,500 euros per capita. In Poland, it was a mere 1,500, which led to, even in normal times, higher mortality rates and worse healthcare for our citizens. Add to this that Poland is dealing with a brain drain within the healthcare services due to low wages, with Polish healthcare personnel going to other European countries in search for higher wages. Now, we can see now why the current roughly 1.3 million Ukrainian refugees that are staying somewhat permanently in Poland put a strain on this already strained system. And the problem here, of course, is that, I mean, the EU, for example, has recently committed an additional sum to support Poland, about 250 million euros, to help Poland deal with the humanitarian and specifically medical situation. However, the thing is, healthcare capacities can't just be bought over the counter. These are long-term investments. You cannot just buy a doctor or a nurse. You have to educate them. You have to train them. You have to make sure that facilities are on point. So long story short, there is goodwill, there is money, but the Polish healthcare system at the moment is facing a serious strain.
Indeed, one can only hope that this situation is resolved one way or the other pretty soon, so that there isn't more crisis up ahead. Julian Verlinger, thank you so much for your time, and do continue to stay safe out there in Vienna, Austria.
Thank you, sir. Goodbye.
And after the break, Russians flocked to H&M stores in Moscow for closing down sales. Please join us again. Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back. A majority leader in the United States Senate, Chuck Schumer, has announced that the body will hold votes today to approve Finland and Sweden's succession into the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO. According to Mr. Schumer, the debate will begin at 1:30 p.m. NATO's 30 allies signed an accession protocol for Finland and Sweden, allowing them to join the nuclear-armed alliance once parliaments ratified the decision, the most significant expansion of the alliance since the 1990s. Moscow has repeatedly warned both countries against joining NATO. On March the 12th, the Russian Foreign Ministry said there will be serious military and political consequences.
And now I'm about to lock in an agreement that will allow the Senate to pass the resolution of ratification for the Finnish and Swedish applications to join NATO. Our NATO alliance is the bedrock that has guaranteed democracy in the Western world since World War II. This strengthens NATO even further and is particularly needed in the light of recent Russian aggression. When Leader McConnell and I met with the Finnish President and Swedish Prime Minister in May, we committed to do this as fast as we could, and certainly before we go home for the August recess. For the awareness of my colleagues, I invited the ambassadors from Finland and Sweden to join us in the gallery during our debate and votes tomorrow.
Over in Britain, Conservative members of Parliament have narrowed the options for Boris Johnson's successor as party leader and Prime Minister to a choice of two candidates. Either Foreign Secretary Liz Truss or former Chancellor Rishi Sunak will be named the winner on September the 5th after a runoff vote amongst Tory party members. The final two candidates will be trying to convince party members to back them at hosting events around the country between the 28th of July and the 31st of August. The Conservative Party has not revealed exactly how many people are eligible to vote in the final stage of the contest, but it is thought to be more than 160,000, or about 0.3% of the total United Kingdom electorate. For more on this, let's talk to our correspondent in London, Juliana Olayinka, who joins us from the British capital. Good morning, Juliana. Nice to see you.
It's very nice to hear you, Laddie. I can't see you just yet, but I will make sure I watch this back.
All right. Well, just to correct for our viewers, you're not in Vienna, Austria. You are in the British capital, London. But let's get right to it. What is the situation now? What is going on in the British capital? Is this perhaps a reward for loyalty because Liz Truss is now ahead of Rishi Sunak in the opinion polls?
Well, you're absolutely right. Liz Truss is not only ahead, according to the latest polls, she's way ahead. The Times this morning released a survey where they spoke to, I would say, pretty much a broad tranche of Conservative voters, and 65% of them say they will be voting for the current Foreign Secretary Liz Truss, while just 25% will be voting for Rishi Sunak. And before I get into the detail of that contest, it's worth bringing in some breaking news just being reported by the Daily Telegraph this morning, and that is that the National Cyber Security Centre in Britain have advised the Conservative Party not to send out any electronic ballots because they are at risk of being hacked. Now, this is really crucial because we know, as you've just outlined, Laddie, we think between 160 to 180,000 Conservative paid-up party members will be eligible to vote for their preferred candidate, and they can do it two ways. So they can do it via post or they can do it online. We know that the vast majority of people will be doing it online, but because of the way this system works, you can change your mind. So you could vote for Liz Truss, let's say yesterday, and if you hear something fantastic about Rishi Sunak, you can then change your vote. But apparently that system has been hacked. So I think there are going to be some really serious concerns about what the implication of this could be. Could there potentially, on the 5th of September, be a launch from either camp if they're not happy about the margins? But it does appear as if Liz Truss, the Foreign Secretary, is going to be handed, some would say, a poison chalice of becoming the Conservative Party leader and the de facto Prime Minister of United Kingdom, succeeding Boris Johnson, who became incredibly unpopular. But what we've realised in the past couple of weeks, especially during the hustings, is that a lot of people are really not happy with the way the former Chancellor of the Exchequer decided to hand in his resignation and in effect throw Prime Minister Boris Johnson under the bus. They think he's incredibly disloyal, but disloyalty is not just the issues that have dogged this contest for Rishi Sunak. You know, we are going through a cost of living crisis, the worst that's been seen in over 40 years. Many of the tax hikes that were put through in the past year or so have been put through by Rishi Sunak. The British public do believe that many of the issues they are facing are down to him. And I know we were speaking about this offline, which is about his very wealthy wife, who is almost a billionaire, was benefiting from a non-dom tax status here, so not paying a tax on income received overseas. She's since reversed that. But a lot of people just believe that Rishi Sunak is completely out of touch and quite arrogant too. I've got to say, during a hustings with Liz Truss last week, he was accused of something Brits like to say is mansplaining when he was constantly interjecting, not allowing her to finish her sentence, visibly irritated at some of the questions. And some people think that perhaps, this pompous individual, not my words, is not ready to run the country. But we'll have to wait and see. But it is looking like this is an own goal for Liz Truss and her camp.
Now, let's look at it from the perspective of the outgoing Prime Minister, Boris Johnson. As you pointed out, Rishi Sunak was seen as one of two prominent people who threw him under the bus. Is this one of his last acts of political maneuvering as Prime Minister to ensure that the person who succeeds him is one of his loyalists, if that is the correct word?
I think that is the correct term. And, let's not underestimate, the strategizing of Boris Johnson and his team. Let's not forget he was able to get Brexit done. Two of his predecessors were not able to do that. And he is very much part of the establishment. Some people may see him on the global scene as a kind of blubbering wreck. But no, it's all very strategic. Those close to him are very upset. And I think it goes to show, if you look at those who have come out to support Liz Truss, 10 prominent cabinet members, including Ben Wallace, the Defence Secretary, who some actually believed would have been a front runner if he had decided to run. He didn't in the end, but he's backing Liz Truss. Kwasi Kwarteng, the business secretary, is backing Liz Truss, and these are all seen as Boris Johnson allies. So I think it is really tough for him. A lot of people do like Boris Johnson. We've got a cancel culture that's thriving here in the UK at the moment. I would say it's probably thriving in the West. And sometimes you can get a little bit confused if you only get your news from Twitter and social media into thinking that the entire country and the entire Conservative backbenchers didn't like him. That's not the case. According to some reports, there is a growing movement of really annoyed Conservative MPs who were actually trying to find a legal way to make sure that Prime Minister Boris Johnson isn't ousted. That would never happen. But as the Prime Minister said during his last PMQs, hasta la vista, baby. And we know that after that, the Terminator says, I'll be back. So perhaps we will be seeing him in a prominent position, perhaps. If Liz Truss is crowned the new tenant of number 10, we could see Boris Johnson back on the front benches. But who knows? But certainly disloyalty plays a massive part into the reasons why Conservative voters have completely turned their back on the Chancellor.
Now, speaking about the Chancellor and what you referenced were the rise in taxes that he became famous for, becoming Mr. Killjoy over. What's the situation out there on the streets? I know that we've talked about inflation. When people watch you on the business programs, they know that you talked about some of the difficulties that people are encountering with high energy costs and the general cost of living. Now, is that likely to be front and center for whoever it is that succeeds Boris Johnson, rather than some of the forays internationally, such as the war in Ukraine?
Yes, I think you're absolutely right. This leadership tussle is certainly a tussle about domestic issues, and I think the cost of living is right at the top of that. And it is really difficult. And saying that from London can seem quite hashtag first world problems, because we know that so many other places in the world are going through particularly difficult times. But it is tough here. Inflation is running at 9.4%. It's a fresh 40-year high. Every single month it gets higher. We've been told, and it's been forecast, that it will reach double digits soon. Fuel prices are absolutely through the roof. It's costing on average over £110 for an average family car to be able to fill the tank. It's expensive at the supermarkets. The retail price index is showing us that grocery prices are going up. It's going to get cold very, very soon, and a lot of families are having to contemplate whether they're having an extra meal on the table or, keeping their house warm. These are real issues, and they're affecting a lot of people. And it is starting to squeeze the middle income earners, Laddie, because they don't get any support from the government. Now, the government have tried to provide some sort of support. In March, there was this kind of hastily put together spring budget by the former Chancellor. And I think the most prominent item out of that shopping list was this £650 help to heat the homes given to families, millions of families, in 2 instalment payments. But I think, when you are struggling to eat, £325 and then another £325 a couple of months later is not the issue. And of course, it comes at a time when the two biggest oil titans, BP and Shell, are reporting extraordinary trading updates. So if, these companies are able to earn billions because of oil and gas prices, why can't some of this be trickling down? Now, there is a windfall tax that is going to be imposed, but that's coming way after. People need help now. Energy bills are going to rise in October. Energy bills are going to rise again in January. And there is a lot of anger on the street. And I think, going back to what we were saying about Rishi Sunak, this is one of his main issues. At a time when the world economy was trying to recover from the pandemic, pandemic, he decided to be the only G7 finance minister to raise taxes. Not only was that a non-conservative thing to do, because it's not within their manifesto, raising taxes, it was also something that was unprecedented in a comparable economy. So yes, things are really tough here. We are going to get Bank of England interest rate decision tomorrow at about 12 noon, which will be interesting because, of course, to abate inflation, you rise interest rates. But if you rise interest rates, it costs more to borrow. So this does also affect people who are on mortgages and who are paying car loans. So it's not a great situation here. But we do remain hopeful. But that's a big issue that whoever takes over on September the 5th will have to sort almost immediately.
I can imagine that with all of this on the table, the front and center role that Boris Johnson was playing with the confrontation with Russia over its invasion of Ukraine has dropped down the scale of priorities.
Unfortunately, it has, and I think many of our most savvy viewers will realise that Western media moves on very quickly. They talk about a war for a week, for 2 weeks, and then other issues take over. But with regards to Britain's relationship with Ukraine, it's still robust behind the scenes. I believe the Homes for Ukraine refugee scheme, which was very late in launching, has finally settled over 100,000 Ukrainians. They are living within British people's homes, and that is seen as a success. I think just when Boris Johnson was meeting with G7 leaders in the Bavarian Alps, Britain pledged to be a strong support in trying to get wheat exports navigated out of the Black Sea, which we know is heavily armoured. That is a deal that they are hoping will be cemented. And then, of course, aid. I think one of Boris Johnson's legacies will be his really strong, robust friendship with Vladimir Zelensky. And I believe Britain has given over £200 million worth of humanitarian aid. This is not just money. This is also medical equipment. This is also ambulances. This is also making sure that children who were unable to complete cancer treatments were flown over to the UK so they can receive the rest of their care. But the issue that we have now is that we kind of don't have a functioning government. Parliament isn't sitting at the moment because it is on its summer recess. Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak, I'm sure for at least 18 hours a day, are focused on trying to make sure they have the answers to Britain's domestic issues. And yes, Ukraine and Russia, albeit a close war, is still a distant war. There are wars within the United Kingdom that need to be resolved, that don't include military armour, but do include people's cost of living and people's way of life. And I think the Brexit referendum has taught every British Prime Minister that they have to focus on what's happening within these borders, which is why we voted for Brexit in the first place. But yes, Ukraine and Britain do still remain very, very close allies, but it's certainly shifted down the list of priorities in recent weeks.
All right, then. Thank you very much, Juliana, for the update. We'll keep an eye on that, and we'll be back to you for a situation report on both fronts. That's the leadership tussle and the economic problems that Britain is going through. But for now, thank you. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has said that in spite of a long-range missile systems provided by the West, his country's forces could not yet overcome Russian advantages in heavy guns and manpower. Mr. Zelensky welcomes the UN brokered deal to unblock the export of Ukrainian grain in his nightly address, but says the goal now is to have an orderly schedule. Mr. Zelensky also said he had spoken to NATO Chief Jens Stoltenberg and Polish Foreign Minister Zbigniew Zaorski about Ukrainian prisoners of war held by Russia.
Yes, indeed, we cannot overcome. Yet the advantage the Russian army has in artillery and troop numbers, this is very much felt in combat, especially in the Donbas. It is just hell there. Words cannot describe it. The first ship with Ukrainian grain has reached the Bosphorus. It has made its voyage via a special corridor in the Black Sea, which was agreed so as to unblock our ports. Our goal now is to have an orderly schedule, so when one ship leaves the port, there should be other vessels, those which get loaded and those on approach to the port. Continuity, regularity, this is a necessary basis. It is needed by all consumers of Ukrainian agricultural produce. I spoke with NATO's Secretary General, Jens Stoltenberg. Of course, the key topic was defense assistance for our fight for freedom. It is cooperation which we have to strengthen continuously to serve our common interests. The head of the OSCE and the Foreign Minister of Poland visited Kyiv today. I thanked him for his support. With Mr. Stoltenberg and Mr. Rao, I drew special attention to the issue of our prisoners of war who are held in Russia. It concerns, among other things, the terrorist act in Olenivka, which must become the definitive argument for all civilized countries to officially recognize Russia as a terrorist state. What else could take for this to happen? Wasn't this terrorist act not obvious and cruel enough for major capitals in the world to take required decisions to recognize Russia as a terrorist country? We also have now the next decisions on strengthening sanctions against Russia for the war. The United States and Canada have widened the list of physical persons and legal entities which face restrictions. This is the right way forward, and it is needed that the EU ends its sanctions pause as quickly as possible by adopting a new sanctions package against the terrorist state. We will work on this in the coming weeks.
A long queue of Russians was seen in Moscow shopping centers waiting to get into H&M stores as the fashion retailer flung open its doors for a final time to sell inventory before making a full exit from the Russian market. Scores of consumer brands suspended operations in Russia after Moscow sent thousands of troops into Ukraine on February the 24th, with H&M, IKEA, and Nike among the companies to have announced plans for a permanent exit. Furniture giant IKEA has reopened for an online-only sale, but H&M opted to allow customers back in person. Exiting Russia, H&M's sixth biggest market is expected to cost the company almost $200 million and affect 6,000 staff. H&M did not immediately respond to requests for comment, but a company spokesperson in July had said H&M would temporarily reopen physical stores in August to sell the remaining inventory in Russia. H&M is the world's second biggest fashion retailer and rents its 170 physical stores in the country and operates them directly. And after the break, a statue of a red Putin sitting on a tank placed in New York City's Central Park. Stay with us. Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back. Laddie Williams joins me as always for an unpacking of the business stories.
Yep. Good morning.
At this point. Morning. BP is doing this.
Yeah. Smiling all the way.
The shareholders too smiling.
Yes.
Because
shareholders
record
smiling.
dividends. Juliana referred to that when I was talking to her, that record dividends, record profits.
Even though the MPs are outraged, that, families are still struggling, at this point with rising energy costs, their incomes are being squeezed, from all sides. But the oil companies are smiling to the bank. Record profit there, about £7 billion is what they made. And they've also, passed on,
to the consumers.
Most of that profit to, the shareholders. So the shareholders, are also happy. So I'm guessing it's a way for them to say, okay, you know what, we know, families are suffering, but you know what, we're giving our investors, our shareholders, a good package.
And the same thing is happening in Saudi Arabia, except that the shareholder in this case is the Saudi Arabian government and those people who managed to buy the 5% that was put up earlier
exactly.
For sale.
Yeah, so we see Saudi Arabia there, the economy is booming right now, and the IMF is actually projecting that it's going to grow even more, in this 2022. And at the end of the day, still the oil prices We saw oil get to about $140 per barrel.
That's right.
And Saudi Arabia as a country, is profiting from that. Even here, Angola was able to pay off their Chinese debt.
Which they were about to default on before this crisis came out.
It would have been nice to say the same for Nigeria, but we can't say that. We're still trying to meet up with our output, and most African countries too, that produce oil are struggling, at this time.
The IMF, of course, going from what you said, says tight monetary policies will impact the markets, and there are tight monetary policies coming from some places. We talked about a few of them in the course of last week.
Yeah.
So already, again, this impact being felt for the IMF to raise the whistle.
Yeah, because, markets are going to feel it, because at the end of the day, cost of borrowing is going up, and now these companies will have to, pay more, to get most of these loans, and servicing, loans from, emerging economies is going to get more expensive, for some of these countries that have borrowed money and are having to service these loans. They're having to pay more, with these rate hikes, and it's impacting, the economies. We're seeing, risk of debt defaults at this time. We're also seeing currencies, currencies of emerging economies struggle. We've seen how the US dollar, and it's actually starting to run again, even though it had a pullback. It's running again, and we're beginning to see, that impact the markets. Also with the Pelosi, visit
to Taiwan.
We're seeing markets actually rattled, with all of that. But I picked at the futures today, and the markets are looking quite green. They're talking about the U.S. markets looking quite green this morning. But here, we also got a nice close yesterday, about 1.4%.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, so investors here are smiling.
Slightly.
Might be the beginning of another bullish run, hopefully, for the NGX equities market.
I still got 2 other trading days. Well, 3 if you count today.
Yeah, so we'll see how, the markets actually play out for the week.
All right, then. Thanks, Laddie. More of that on Business Morning, which follows this program, and then Business Incorporated later in the day. Let's take a look at some of the sports news out of this conflict. French basketballers who are already playing or intend to play for professional clubs in Russia and Belarus will not be selected to the national team of France. The French Basketball Federation says this decision will be enforced until Russia's special operation in Ukraine is over. The Federation says all players and coaches selected in the men's senior and women's teams are to sign a sworn statement indicating that they are not engaged and will not engage with a Russian or Belarusian club for the duration of the conflict with Ukraine. 5 Russian track cyclists have been invited to participate in the Fiorenzuola race this month, performing for the Spanish club Barcelona Road Cycling Group. The invitations were extended to Denis Denisov, Lev Gonov, Ivan Nadolsky, Vlas Shishkin, and Ilya Shegelov. The Russian Cycling Federation said the cyclists are to participate in the tournament under a neutral status. And finally, on the program, a red statue depicting Russian leader Vladimir Putin riding a tank has been installed in a New York City playground. The statue is the work of French artist James Colomina, who is known for employing red statues and placing them in unannounced fashion. The Putin statue has already been seen in Paris, Luxembourg gardens before now. All right, some would debate if that is actually art, but that's how we wrap up the program this morning. Thanks for being with us. I'm Ladi Akeridoluale. There's an update at 5 o'clock on The World Today. Do watch out for that, but for now, have a pleasant morning ahead.